What's up, everyone? Welcome back to Conflicts of Interest. This is episode 153. I'm the host, Kyle Anzalone. As always, I need you guys to share the show. It's hosted at the Libertarian Institute. libertarianinstitute.org/Kyle is the best place to go to find the show, all the show notes. We embed the video version and everything of the show there. But you can also subscribe to the show on YouTube, Rumble, or Odyssey to get the video version. Make sure you are subscribed wherever you are watching or listening to the show. It does happen that people get unsubscribed. We obviously have a contrarian narrative here, and we are the types to get targeted. So be sure that you are subscribing to the show and like the show if you can. Give it a rating or a review. Anything you could do to help promote the show in the algorithms. You could follow the show on any of our social media accounts, Facebook, MeWe, or Twitter handle. The Twitter handle for the show is at @con_interest. My Twitter handle is at @KyleAnzalone_. You can also support the show by giving us money. We take that at Patreon or Subscribestar. You can also donate crypto, and we have the information for that in the show notes page. The last thing you could do to help out the show is to do your CBD shopping through Paloma Verde. PalomaVerdeCBD.com has a great selection of products, and they're all lab tested to ensure that you're getting consistent, high quality products that work. I really like their topicals. I use their sports cream nearly every day. One of the great things about the sports cream I get at Paloma Verde is it works. It doesn't require a lot. I used to use like a lot of the products that you get at CVS, but they're quite expensive and you go through the bottle very fast because you have to keep reapplying it. That isn't what I find with the topicals at Paloma Verde. They work well. They work for a long time. So check out their great lineup of products. Again, I really like the sports cream. Whenever you check out, be sure to use the promo code PEACE. That lets them know that you came from the show. It also gets you a 25% discount when you spend $75 or more. All right, now let's get into the episode. First thing to talk about today is Afghanistan, where all the news is really around what Joe Biden is going to do and how many people is he going to evacuate. There's a lot of numbers being thrown around about how many people the U.S. is getting out. I'm skeptical of these numbers right now. As of the recording of the show, it looks like about 60,000 is what the U.S. is claiming. Since August 14th, that would be about 10 days. Now, I'm not certain, but I think they are including the other NATO coalition numbers when they say 60,000. And that's how over the weekend, the number went from like 7,000 to 25,000. I think they started to roll in the NATO number, although I'm not absolutely positive on that. And, we're still, I think, trying to get clarity on actually how many people are being evacuated. The other thing that isn't clear is how many of the Americans that are in Afghanistan want to leave and are being evacuated. I've seen numbers being thrown around about 7,000 Americans have been evacuated, although the estimates of number of Americans in Afghanistan is quite a wide range, between 10 and 15,000. And so it seems absolutely possible to me that either half the Americans are out, or at 7,000 plus the people at the Kabul airport, maybe just about everybody who wants to leave is there if the number is closer to 10,000 or maybe a little bit lower. Now, when you hear 10,000 Americans, that could mean, or 10 to 15,000 Americans, that could mean a lot of things. It could mean like 10 to 15,000 U.S., like American people who are born in the United States, aid workers. And that number seems like that would be a lot. But I think this probably includes this war has been going on for 20 years. And so there's a lot of, Afghans who have gotten American citizenship throughout the war, as they have been a part of the American war effort or government in Afghanistan. And, they've probably had families. And so that adds to a number of people. If they have since gone back to Afghanistan for any reason, that could significantly add to the numbers. It's unclear how many contractors are still in Afghanistan, and I'm guessing that they would be included in this number. up to very recently, they were still advertising jobs for contractors, and the Pentagon was still awarding contracts for the year 2021. And so there could be thousands of contractors potentially in Afghanistan, although I would guess that a lot of the Pentagon contractors had things wrapped up in their contracts terminated or whatever, as the Afghan government no longer exists. Although, again, the numbers are unclear. Now, if you look at the U.S. mainstream media reporting about this, it's all about, we're not getting our people out, and there's so many people that still want to go that we're should take and we're not taking. I think it's unclear how much this is the case. There's certainly a lot of people at the Kabul airport. How many of them are actually going to qualify under the State Department visa program for those visas? I'm not sure. It seems like there's quite a few people being turned away. I was just looking at some reporting today from, I believe, CNN, who had interviewed 2 or 3 people who had claimed to work for the U.S. government at some time who were denied these visas. And so then you also have groups of people, at least it's being reported, that are being removed from Afghanistan, and it's not clear if they're actually going to qualify for the visas, and so they may be sent back, which seems like it may put them at even more heightened risk, right? Because then you now have to re-enter the country. I'm assuming the Taliban at some point are going to set up a more formal custom system, and when people enter their country, they're going to say, hey, who are you and what are you doing here, just like when you come into the United States. And if that happens, that could present a problem for these groups of people. Now, there's a lot of questions about if everybody who wants to leave is being allowed to leave by the Taliban. And this is really being wrapped up in the, Taliban are brutal and they're not going to let everybody out. I'm not sure. There's, reports from the U.S. government in particular saying that the Taliban are still allowing people, particularly foreign nationals, to leave the country. I'm just not sure about all this. I could tell you guys what's being reported and what made sense. The numbers that the U.S. are putting out, they're all possible. The 10 to 15,000 Americans, it's possible 7,000 have gotten out. It's possible they've evacuated 60,000 people. Who knows how many more are waiting and how long it's going to take to process them. But I think the goal is to make it portrayed in the Western press that they're not going to be able to get all the people out that should be eligible to leave by August 31st, and we need to stay longer. Now, Joe Biden had set that as the original date, August 31st, and of today we got an announcement from the White House that he will be sticking with that. There was some reason to doubt that he might stick with this number. There were a lot of U.S. officials, I believe even Biden himself, said that no Americans would be left behind, but either they feel comfortable that no Americans who want to leave will either be able to get to the Kabul airport by August 31st or ever, or that they'll have them all out by August 31st. And so that's to the best of my ability, what I could, say as is happening in Afghanistan surrounding the situation. Again, I think you're going to get a much more elevated narrative of the chaos coming from the Western media. I think some of the chaos, again, couldn't have been avoided. We talked about this on the last show, that there were going to be people in Afghanistan who the U.S. wasn't going to take for whatever. Maybe they have connections or family connections to whatever groups, or maybe they were poppy growers or heroin growers, whatever was involved, and that could create a panic scene at the airport. I'm not sure how many people the Taliban are going to Afghans the Taliban are going to allow to leave. You do have a situation here, and we have seen this before with like the communists building the wall in Berlin to prevent people from leaving. And so if you do have a somewhat repressive government and you have citizens, like from a logistical standpoint of the Taliban, not necessarily just out of pure cruelty, they could see it as a way, that if all the doctors leave, it's going to put them in a bigger problem. And so they're going to stop allowing doctors to leave the country or something like that. I could also imagine there being a situation here too, where with the amount of U.S. funding that has gone into Afghanistan in the past 20 years, that a lot of officials, a lot of people who have advanced degrees, doctors, engineers, stuff like that, could have been trained in U.S. NGO programs, and that's kind of going to create what they've called brain drains in other areas, where you're just going to have a lot of people who are critical to making sure people could get running water and electricity into their homes, that there's doctors and nurses and stuff. If maybe a huge number of these people have been trained by U.S. NGOs and are now looking to get out, the Taliban could face a real situation where everybody's going to exit, and it's not exactly clear what level of cruelty that the Taliban are going to exact. And hell, just to talk about the conditions here, and this is something that I have been bringing up on the show for several months, something I was concerned about from very early on, because the U.S. bureaucracy and the just logistics work so poorly. And then once, the U.S. built government of Afghanistan fell faster than the U.S. government predicted, I had been concerned that essentially there wasn't going to be systems, food, shelter, sanitation, housing set up for the refugees leaving Afghanistan. And there's a report from Axios that describes the Al Udeid Air Base in Qatar. This is the main place that the U.S. is taking the refugees, called it a living hell, an email. And again, this is from unnamed sources that they're getting from the military. An unnamed official said that there was feces and urine and rats on the floor. And it sounds like just a huge health hazard, right? Forget for a second about if they're doing COVID tests or what's going on with that, but just looking from the typical health concerns of cholera, other disease breaking out. Hell, Afghanistan is a country that has a problem with wild polio, and so if kids aren't vaccinated for polio and there's feces on the ground, that could be an issue. I think we could look at a wide variety of issues that could come when you have again human excrement on the ground, which is reported to be the case now in Qatar for the refugees. And so they could be facing a more hellish situation because they're afraid of the Taliban than they'll actually face staying in Afghanistan. But then that just is me speculating. It's not clear what kind of oppression, increased oppression people are going to face in Afghanistan, now that the Taliban are in charge, or that would be even increased for all these people. The previous government was cruel and very corrupt. All right, so the Taliban have put out that the U.S. needs to stick to that August 31st red line, or that there's going to be problems. Now, I'm not sure if the U.S. really just needed several hours into the September 1st, or even a few days, or maybe a week, if the Taliban wouldn't be willing to negotiate on that. We have seen in the past with Biden blowing the May 1st deadline date, the Taliban were willing to work and extend it and engage in diplomacy. It's crazy that you have all these U.S. representatives is saying that the Taliban are terrorists and you could never, negotiate with them. The U.S. has successfully negotiated with the Taliban, where we've not only broken the agreement with them, but they haven't killed an American in 18 months in Afghanistan, even though the U.S. has continued to carry out heavy airstrikes against the Taliban. It shows that you can negotiate diplomatically with the Taliban, and that these narratives that you can't are completely ridiculous. So maybe the U.S. could negotiate with the Taliban. The CIA director, William Burns, recently made a visit to Kabul and apparently met with the, I guess, guy who's kind of at least the face of the Taliban government right now in Afghanistan, that being Abdul Ghani Baradar, who was one time, I believe, in Qatar, but is now back in the country. So with Baradar in charge, he met with William Burns. I'm not, obviously we don't know what was discussed, and if the CIA did say what was discussed, I would, be at least a little skeptical about that, but assuming, they're talking logistics and plans and trying to make sure this thing doesn't fall apart, there is a huge risk that something could really go wrong right here. Afghanistan is a country that's seen a lot of suicide bombings or terrorist attacks in the past 20 years. Some of them committed by the Taliban, some of them committed by the Islamic State Khorasan group, which is an enemy of the Taliban. In fact, in the past year, the Taliban have been the American anti-ISIS fighting force, the most effective one that they've had in Afghanistan. We backed it with air power. And so it could be that ISIS sets off a bomb. There was a case also, you just look at the desperation of civilians, especially, as the days dwindle and it becomes maybe increasingly clear to people that they're not going to be one of the Afghans that get to leave the country. What crazy things that people may do in desperation. There was an exchange of gunfire outside of the Kabul airport. No U.S. personnel were hurt, but apparently the U.S. military did engage. I guess what the U.S. was describing, one, their Afghan forces were killed. So I guess maybe they still are employing like 100 or so thousand, maybe people, former members of the Afghan National Army, who are, I would imagine the U.S. will agree to take them when they leave. And at this point, they're providing maybe the most direct security between the U.S. and the Taliban, or not Taliban, maybe the Taliban, but also the Afghan citizens looking to leave the country. We continue to get these images of, people either climbing over barriers or having, handing their children over. I'm not exactly sure why this is happening and people aren't going through the typical processing areas. The Western media is portraying this. The Taliban aren't letting people get through certain checkpoints. But it's all presented as being the fault and the problem of the Taliban cruelty, and not the cruelty that the U.S. has inflicted in this 20-year war and occupation against the Taliban. I guess the only other real news story I have from Afghanistan is that Iran has started to allow fuel exports to return to Afghanistan. There's a report that these exports are happening at a far lower tariff. Not sure if this is, something that Iran is just, kind of leaning on the Taliban to save some money on it, or maybe if there's an increased security concern, and so to get the shipping companies to go with it, they have to have more margin of error, and that's the cause of the lowered tariffs coming into Afghanistan for this fuel. But it does go to show that the Taliban are having successful, somewhat diplomatic relations with neighboring states like Iran, like Pakistan, and they're making some, trade through those borders, and that's going to be key for Afghanistan to not fall into a more hellish state. Now, I want to talk quickly about one narrative that's been coming out on Afghanistan. There's this really great graph in The Economist to talk about this. So the point that a lot of people have been making, especially the war hawks that want to continue this war, is that this occupation can go on at relatively low cost. And, they say this as low cost because there's a few number of American soldiers dying. Well, this graph from The Economist shows that while there's not many U.S. soldiers dying, and in fact that number is, pretty much zero for, again, over the past year now, it is zero. But there's a huge number of Afghan forces who are being killed, and also civilians who are being killed in the country, thousands of them every single year. And so these are the exact civilians that they're saying we had to continue this low cost occupation to save, and yet they ignore that their warfare is a huge risk to these civilians and is in no way low cost. And in fact, it's the Trump administration really ramped up their airstrikes and killed thousands of civilians. And I'm sure it's thousands of more than admit it. And also they count a lot of Taliban fighters as civilian, or a lot of civilians as Taliban fighters, especially since the Trump administration spent several years just bombing Afghanistan's what they believed was Afghanistan's drug trade. And then the number of Afghan fighters that are being killed, this can't be considered at all low cost either in any way, especially when you look at the U.S. has developed this war economy in Afghanistan. I'm sure there's a lot less industry and legal industry that's, not opium based there now than before. All the economy goes through the U.S. And so if you're a young man in Afghanistan, even if you really don't want to go enlist and fight the Taliban, that's not really your thing. Just, the way to make money, the way to have a life. We see this in the US, that there's an economic draft, essentially, that if you're a poor person, it's one of your ways to make a living in life. And so we have to realize that there's a lot of these deaths. These are maybe people that are just diehard, want to fight for their country and would have died fighting the Taliban anyways, but rather people the US essentially economically forced into the military that we built to fight the Taliban. And these have to be included in the cost of the U.S. And they can't just be written, oh, they were Afghan security forces, so their lives don't matter at all. All these lives absolutely matter, and it's absolutely horrific what the U.S. has done to that country. All right, the last story I have on Afghanistan just gets into the polling numbers here about the withdrawal. And I want to make a couple points clear, because there is a lot of rightful, I think, anger in the United States about how this withdrawal has been handled. And if you look at this CBS poll from YouGov, removal of U.S. troops from Afghanistan has gone. 44% say very, very badly. 30% say somewhat badly. So that would be 74% saying badly. And then the 21% saying somewhat well, and 5% saying very well. Now, I do think Biden obviously is responsible to some extent for a poor withdrawal. I think that the withdrawal was going to go somewhat badly, no matter how the withdrawal was planned, and that this was just a consequence of the 20-year war in Afghanistan. It's like if the U.S. stopped quantitative easing and people lost money, even if there's a better way to unwind, or to stop printing money, or a slower way to do something like that, if you just go the rip the band-aid off method or something like that, maybe there's an increase in consequences, but it was never going to be perfect in the first place. And that's a really important thing to remember here. But even with that, 63% of Americans do approve of removing U.S. troops. So as bad as the withdrawal has gone, Americans are still withdrawing troops. And I think that number has decreased a little bit. But at the same time, Americans have not turned against the withdrawal. And I think this is really important news, because the corporate press is really trying to spin this as and teaching a political lesson to presidents that, hey, if you end a war, your poll numbers are going to go down. And it's, I think, really important to note that is, if the Biden administration maybe could have done this with less bad press, that even with the numbers where they are, people still support the withdrawal. I don't think his presidential numbers would have gotten as bad. Now, it also would have helped had he, preface this with the American people that, hey, this might get ugly, that the government could fall quickly, that this has been a debacle for 20 years, and we have built a government on, I would say quicksand, but that's not, it's just on water. And as soon as we remove the flotation device that we've been providing, this thing could sink in an absolute second. And it's something that we have to realize. Had he been more open, I think his poll numbers would probably hurt less. And Americans would probably say that this is just going somewhat badly at a higher percentage than very badly. But again, it would have had to have been planned just a little bit better too. And that would have come, with being more honest with the American people. All right, everybody, that's everything I have on Afghanistan for today. Of course, I'll have more on this in the coming weeks as the drawdown continues. We see what decisions that Biden made, when the decisions get tough, when there's people outside the Kabul airport, when the corporate press is crying that you're condemning these hundreds or thousands of people to death by leaving them and exiting on the 31st, if Biden will be able to stick to it and do it, and if we don't have if we don't fall off the tip of this knife right now that we are on in Afghanistan, and don't have some violent act at the Kabul airport in the meantime. All right, so just this is a real quick update from the last show where me and Will talked about a lot of the new mandates going on in the U.S. surrounding the COVID regime. This was including a lot of places were going back to mask mandates, more places were going with movement passports or vaccine requirements, and then we got the announcement, as Will had predicted, that would happen this coming week, but it happened on Monday, pretty much after the show dropped, that Pfizer's COVID vaccine was approved, received full FDA approval. This was a difference from what it had previously, which was just the emergency approval. I don't know in what way it really changes anything for the legal status of the vaccine. I don't think it changes anything with the liability issues or something like that. If people believe that the FDA effectively regulates the vaccine market, then this may be a sign to them that this vaccine is safe or something like that. But I think there's a lot of people who have skepticism of the FDA for a variety of reasons that have absolutely nothing to do with COVID. Understanding how big pharma works, how industry is tied with government, and the regulators oftentimes were former high-ranking people at these companies, and that there's all kinds of conflicts of interest, and that has nothing to do with COVID whatsoever. And so I think there's going to be a lot of people that remain skeptical. Now, one thing that our politicians are saying, though, is that the full FDA approval of just the Pfizer vaccine, mind you, paves the way for more vaccine mandates, specifically vaccine mandates from employers. And now you have organizations like the AMA and the U.S. government at large. I think I saw the governor of Virginia leaning heavily on companies to start mandating that all their employees be vaccinated. Now, they do kind of throw out an exemption thing there, and my guess is that, this is like a little asterisk that they had to put in there, but they really don't want anybody to get an exemption. They want everybody to get the vaccine. I'm not sure how the FDA approval ties in with the booster shot. I guess when the booster shot was approved, it was approved with the emergency approval, as the COVID vaccine was, the Pfizer COVID vaccine was only had emergency approval at the time. Now, I'm not sure if this approval only applies to the 2-dose or just the Pfizer vaccine writ large, and if they decide to do booster shots every X number of months, then it continues to have full FDA approval. I want to make it clear, I'm not sure how that all works, and how that will maybe work with mandates. So if you only have the employer mandate because it has full FDA approval, can your employer only mandate you get 2 shots and not the third, which they're now saying you need to be considered fully vaccinated? So lots of questions remain. I think a lot of them are just unanswered because people even the policymakers are unclear of what the answers are at this point. But we continue to see government seize more and more of our power and freedoms as they just require more and more of all of us. And it's just, I'm making this point from Civil Liberties Point YouTube, in no way making a comment on the vaccine itself. All right, I think that's my update for COVID. My guess is there's a large number of these that are just reported that they're going to be mandates put in place, and as these mandates roll out, we will continue to cover it on the show, who's being mandated to do what, where, and how the booster shots play in. All right, so now on to Haiti, where a lot of the information I'm getting is from this great work by Patrick McFarlane. He put out a podcast already on it. He has released an article on his Rockfin page where you could get access to that if you donate to him. His article is really fantastic and will run at the Libertarian Institute this week. So what Pat highlights is that, I guess probably 10 days ago now, last Saturday, there was a serious earthquake in Haiti that I think it was in the 7 range, maybe a 7.6 or 7.3 I saw. And this is a country that was devastated and it has not been rebuilt from an earthquake in 2010 and has also been hit by different hurricanes in the Gulf. And, there's just several reasons that there are infrastructure and humanitarian, shortages in Haiti prior to this. But this particular earthquake was serious and caused a lot of damage. I believe so far the casualty number I saw was 2,200 dead. I'm not sure exactly. This I believe was confirmed, so I'm not sure how much higher the estimates are going to be, how many people they haven't been able to find yet, especially as after this tropical storm rolled through. I think it was possibly going to be a hurricane and didn't get to that serious of a status, which I'm sure was very fortunate, but nonetheless, high winds are probably, and rains are a huge issue when you have infrastructure problems. So, figure like sewer lines that are probably damaged, people living in tents, and how camping in a thunderstorm is rough. Camping in a tropical storm, I'm sure, is hell. So it's probably been very rough for the people of Haiti. The U.S., at the request of USAID, the Pentagon is sending troops and ships to Haiti. Now, there is a history of U.S. intervention in Haiti, and in fact, I believe the U.S. picked up the same operation name that they had before in Haiti for this new operation, which is the Joint Task Force Haiti. And in the past, this was a huge debacle. It caused a massive cholera outbreak that killed thousands of people in Haiti. That didn't need to happen. For the most part, the aid efforts failed to produce anything tangible. There's a great ProPublica article. If you Google billions were spent and 6 houses were built, you could go and look in to see. And Pat summarizes it very fantastic and says, short of the rubble being cleared from the streets, not much was done with the billions of dollars that was donated to Haiti. And so the country was in a poor situation. Of course, prior to this, you had in July, the president of Haiti, Jovenel Moise, assassinated in his home. The day that he was assassinated, he was set to announce Ariel Henry to be the new prime minister of the country, and that would replace Claude Joseph. Now, because Moise was killed before Henry was appointed, Claude Joseph then assumed reins of Haiti until the U.S. switched and started backing Henry, who is now, I guess, the de facto leader of Haiti, although it's still unclear of who was behind the assassination plot behind Moise's death. Now, the U.S. is deploying 2,000 Marines, or 200 Marines to Haiti. They are coming from North Carolina, and apparently there's a lot of medical units here and stuff like that. You also have the U.S. sending the USNS Burlington, which is a fast-paced cargo ship. If you look at some of the assets that the U.S. is deploying, some of them I guess are more of an issue for like PR reasons, right? Because the U.S. military and is such an essential part of the U.S. empire and has engaged in all of these nation building efforts and has been the front for all these CIA regime change efforts and weapons funneling efforts all over the world. There's a lot of reasons to be skeptical anytime the U.S. deploys any asset to any country. However, sometimes the U.S. deploys assets, to these countries that that can be helpful, even if they are covers for other nefarious things. But, this cargo ship is probably bringing much needed water and medicine to Haiti. The Chinooks that they're deploying could be helpful in, transporting these goods around, or maybe in, clearing some of the rubble. Some of these other assets could be useful. Now, another thing that's being brought on these ships that I guess has more of a question mark to me are COVID vaccines. Now, it's going to show a quick graph here. And again, I'm not trying to make any general claims about the coronavirus or anything like that, but this graph on the page, I'll describe it for the people only listening, shows the daily new confirmed COVID-19 deaths per million, and there is a light blue line for Haiti, a red line for the Dominican Republic, and then the United States. I thought these would be some good countries to compare. If you have is showing that, Haiti as peak has I think 4.9 deaths per million per day as its peak, where the US is actually at 10 at one point, so multiple times higher. And there's only one point on this entire graph where the numbers are even close. And in fact, Haiti's COVID numbers have even been lower fairly consistently than the Dominican Republic, which I think is comparable as it shares an island, although I do think Haiti has more infrastructure and more poverty. So it is maybe surprising that Haiti's numbers would have been better of the two countries, but that is the case. Anyways, this number definitely doesn't show a COVID crisis at all in Haiti. And in fact, if you're looking at that and you're saying that people from the United States, which, has increasing by that graph COVID number, sending those people to Haiti may actually put Haiti at risk for more of a COVID outbreak. That's not something being considered. And even if they are, say they're bringing vaccines or something like that, and the U.S. personnel are vaccinated, it's been shown that you could transmit COVID with the vaccine anyways. And if there's not a major COVID outbreak in Haiti right now, you could possibly be bringing more COVID with all these troops, if that's an issue, something you're looking at preventing and slowing down. And so it's a real, I guess, mystery to me as to why the U.S. is so concerned to bring all of these COVID vaccinations to Haiti, unless it's just a PR effort and no Americans really bothered to look, if what Haiti is really in need of right now is probably more bottles of water than COVID vaccines. The U.S. personnel will remain in Haiti for up to 4 months. Check out Patrick McFarland's article. He gets into the history of USAID being the front for some of the CIA regime change operations and stuff like that, and why people of Haiti would be skeptical and wouldn't want this U.S. aid. All right, last thing I have to talk about on today's show is Yemen. The first story I have from Al Jazeera is really interesting, especially as I am a libertarian and believe in Austrian economics. And it says Yemen. The headline is Yemen currency clash deepens crisis in war-torn country. And Yemen is a country that right now has one currency with two different exchange rates. And this is very interesting, as the reason is in 2019, the Houthis, the people in Yemen who control most of the population of the country, I think it's 80% of the population, they're opposing the US-backed Saudi regime change effort in Yemen, right? And so in 2019, they stopped allowing new banknotes to be taken by people in their held territory. And they said that this was out of inflation concerns because Saudi Arabia was printing a bunch of money and injecting it into the Yemeni economy. And so it has created a situation now where if you are in the Saudi-backed areas of Yemen, the Saudi-backed government areas of Yemen, the exchange rate is 1,000 Yemeni rials to a US dollar, whereas if you are in the Houthi-controlled areas, it is at 600 to a dollar, and that is relatively more stable. And now this is being further complicated because Saudi Arabia says they have found some older Yemeni Rial banknotes from, I guess, dated prior to when the Houthis made the cutoff note. But the Houthis are saying that these are actually counterfeit notes and are not accepting them as well. And so I'm sure it's a real problem in the Houthi back areas where you have all this potential for counterfeit, not to mention everybody has to look at all these notes and make sure that they have the correct dates on them. I'm not sure I've ever heard of a situation like this before, and if I have anybody in my audience who is an Austrian economist and would be willing to, look into this and kind of see how this is working and what this is doing to the economy. It seems like a crazy scenario. Now, one of the things I think Saudi Arabia is trying to do here is to make their occupation of Yemen cheaper. They're printing a whole bunch of new Yemeni currency notes, right, and flooding it into the market, giving it to their people first. And so this is a really dastardly thing and a huge amount of currency manipulation to do. I mean, I would guess like if the U.S. printed a whole bunch of Mexican pesos and started giving them out to the people in Mexico we liked, those people would become extremely rich extremely fast, but would create a lot of inflation for everybody else in the country. And that seems to be what is happening in Yemen. However, the Houthis have found a way to combat that by not taking the new banknotes. However, the amount of counterfeit that has to be going on has to be a major problem in Yemen. I'm guessing this causes huge logistical concerns as well, and how these exchange rates work. It must be a giant mess and causing a large amount of unnecessary poverty in Yemen that already doesn't need to exist. It's something that the U.S. could probably stop if it just withdrew all of its support for the Saudi-backed regime change in that country. Now, Saudi Arabia just isn't going with the economic route. It's not just a blockade of the country. It's not just this currency manipulation. They have also continued their airstrikes, potentially 26 airstrikes this past weekend in Yemen, most centered around central Yemen, in the contested city of Marib, where maybe 66 fighters were killed over the weekend. And this is something that we're going to continue to see in Yemen until the U.S. finally pulls the plug on the Saudi-backed war effort. Look, Saudi Arabia is in a position where they could continue to bomb Yemen essentially on end as long as the Western countries support it, and the Houthis won't be able to have a normal in any way normalize their economy or their country. And this is going to just continue to make the worst humanitarian crisis on the planet even worse. The UN's estimating 400,000 children will die of deprivation in Yemen in the year 2021. We're already 3/4 of the way through this year so far. I'm not sure if that exactly means that 300,000 children have died. My guess is that number is going to get exponentially worse as we get throughout the year. As the shortages get compellingly worse, more and more children will end up succumbing. And so, there are ways to make this problem in Yemen less worse, and that starts with ending the U.S. war effort in that country. All right, that's where I'm wrapping the show for today. Hope everybody enjoyed it. Share the show again. YouTube, Odyssey, Rumble for video version. It's hosted at the Libertarian Institute. Do your CBD shopping at Paloma Verde. Follow me on Twitter at Kyle Anzalone _.